What if you had the resources you needed for your mental health right at your fingertips? Imagine a world where our mental well-being is prioritized just like our physical health, and where we have access to the tools and support we need. That's exactly what the Make Mental Health Matter show is all about. Join Kelli Melissa Reinhardt, a true warrior for mental health, founder of Make Mental Health Matter nonprofit, author, and wellness coach. This show is your gateway to breaking down the stigma surrounding mental health. Tune in for enlightening conversations, expert insights, and empowering stories that will not only increase awareness, but also provide education about mental health. It's time to have those hard conversations, prioritize your well-being, and make your mental health matter. Your mental wellness journey starts here.
Welcome to another episode of the Make Mental Health Matter show. I am your host, Kelli Melissa Reinhardt, and I'm always excited to be back every single week. This week, I do have another guest. I hope that you have enjoyed all of the previous guests. It's kind of cool how, whether I plan it or not, which is generally the not, I don't generally plan it, but all my guests they tend to, like, top one over the other and kind of incorporate in what the last one said. And I'm pretty sure this one, it might be very similar. So, and we like to change it up, right? Sometimes you get me solo, sometimes you get me with guests, but no matter what, I'm not gonna super ramble today. But I am excited about the guest for today, as he has a very unique story, I feel like, and what he's accomplishing or trying to accomplish in this world, I think, is also really incredible. So let me tell you a little bit about him, and then I will bring him up. So Mike Martin is an author, EMT, podcaster, and meditation teacher. He is the founder of Project Mindfully Outdoors, where he blends wilderness, mindfulness, and personal growth. His work explores resilience, healing, and lessons found in nature, which he's in nature today. So, welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Kelli, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited. I know even the last time that we chatted, you had the nature behind you, and I think it's so serene. So
It's not only serene, but it's very fitting for the way that my story of rebuilding my life and finding my way back home after traveling through what I call the unseen frontier really played out, because it all happened in nature.
that's amazing. Well, why don't you share with the audience a little bit more about your story?
So I think you actually summed it all up in the bio. But no, actually, because I'm very laid back about the way that I present everything, which I have found actually has a bigger impact. If you can share a story, build a smile, and open a conversation, you can actually touch somebody. And that's how it all started for me, because my life had fallen apart. I was facing my second divorce, and I wound up finding myself in a position where I felt like life was terminal. I was going to, end my life, and it was just bound to happen. And then one day I turned on a conversation that was on a podcast. And that podcast just happened to have a Stoic author who threw some Marcus Aurelius quotes on me that was like a taste of good medicine for a change. Because he mentioned something about how the adversity of life is actually an opportunity to showcase who you are inside. And when I heard that, it was a dose of powerful good medicine, because it made me stop and think that, if I am successful at my attempt, the last thing that my ex-wife said would be what I left behind. It's what my kids would remember. that I was good for nothing and, not worth anything to anybody, including them. And that set me on a path that put me into talk therapy to start to change the direction of my life. And in talk therapy, she brought up the idea of both meditation and journaling. And I laughed at her. I was like, that's really stupid. How is that even going to do anything for what I'm trying to accomplish? Because at the time, I thought my goal was to simply go back home, to where I came from. And the more that I started doing it and actually sitting out in nature and going through the course, I realized it was a lot different than what I was looking at trying to do. And ultimately, what happened was one day I turned on an audiobook called The Wind is My Mother by Braveheart. And there's a quote in there that talks about how there's many forms of death. We don't have to physically die to let something go that no longer serves us. And that question stuck with me for a long time. I started journaling on it and realizing that that was really what that attempt symbolized, was letting go of all these past things that no longer served who I was. And the weird part about the journaling is that the name Daniel Boone kept returning from my childhood. And the more that I thought about how that was reoccurring, the more I was like, you know what? Maybe I need to go out and actually touch some of these places that were accredited to him. Maybe if I understand him better, something good might come out of it. And the more that I got out and I started doing that, the more I started uncovering the man behind the myth. And as I was uncovering the actual human being that lived his story, I was starting to see connections and things that made sense in my life. And it helped me to really better understand him. And that's where the book actually came from. The reason that I wrote the book, though, wasn't I got done with that and had all these journals, was like, okay, I'm going to do a book now. That came about based off of the EMT work, being in the back of the ambulance with somebody that's in a mental health crisis, sharing my story, and them actually slowing down and listening and seeing the impact. And it brought me all the way back to that original podcast when I was like, if I'm having this one kind of impact, not only on myself, but on another person or somebody at a meditation class, what if I just put it out there and just let the energy take it where it went? And that's how I finally took the time to sit and compile everything and put the book together.
I love that. And I know, I mean, there's a lot of layers in there that you just explained too. But so a couple of things pop up into my head. The first one I want to start, well, because we'll talk about the book also, which I think is such a big part of your journey. But going back is that you had attempted to take your own life. I mean, it wasn't just like a thought, right? Like you actually physically tried to, and then coming out of that and realizing like there's all these things which guided you into talk therapy, which also guided you into finding out more about like what it was all about, which I think is so amazing that you took that experience and then shifted it into, wow, I really like want to understand. And then I love that even talking about like there are other ways to die, right? And it's certain, it may be pieces of us that need to change or shift. And also that could be like, the parts that need to die to build or allow other parts to come out in us. So, I think it's amazing that you do share your story. And then moving forward, the question that popped into my head, because there are probably some people that are watching that don't really know who Daniel Boone is. So, can you share a little bit like who he is? I know that your book really showcases a lot of his life too, but for those people, just share a little bit like who Daniel Boone is.
So that's a great question. And actually, I think I got a redefined answer yesterday when I was talking to Dr. John Fox about not only Daniel Boone, but about Boone Trace. And that's one of the most important things that Boone accomplished in his life. He came through the Cumberland Gap and he opened up the West for Western expansion. And the other things that Daniel Boone is best known for would be being a long hunter, settling Kentucky, and just all around being a great guy. And I know that sounds like the most generic answer in the world, but that was one thing that I kept coming back to is the fact that he was a father. He overcame so much adversity, and yet he managed to live true to his original faith built values.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. And I love, I mean, that you, well, explained it in a simple way, right? Because some people are like, there's a lot more to his story. But yeah, I'm glad that you were able to put it in like a short, condensed version. Um, and so it really was just this path that you were like, I need to figure out like who this person is, and then also based off a quote, right, that you were seeing, and you're like, man, this is such a different way to think about myself, think about life, and all of these things. And then fast forward, then you started creating a book around what your experience was, which I think is so amazing too.
Well, there was many years and many different things in between point A and the final book because originally what I did is while I was hiking and even when I got home, I had started the Project Mindfully Outdoors podcast. And then, those conversations in the ambulance came up and a lot of it revolved around the honesty of what I discovered in the wilderness. And that's why I called the book The Honest Wilderness, because it doesn't just simply expose something. Like it doesn't just, put you out there because there's no distractions, but it invites you to discover who you are in the most authentic kind of way. And that was where the Daniel Boone link came in, was as I started writing more and more about my childhood and, remembering the experiences with my grandfather and learning about the myth of Daniel Boone and going back and looking at these different journal entries and realizing that, in reality, the frontier back in that time only ended up disappearing from our eyes because we ran out of land to discover.
Mhm.
And it took a shift. It became this place that's within each of us because we still encounter the same exact things. We have to walk into things that we don't know anything about. We have to adapt, adjust, overcome, face grief and everything else that comes with life. But when you look back at history, it's more than just something on a page. It's a conversation that you can get engaged in and find a reference point to build a new map.
Yeah. I will say that history was not one of my favorites in school back in the day, right? But now I'm like fascinated by, I was like, man, I wish I would have paid more attention because there are some really interesting things in history. And I know the first time when you and I talked, I was like, Daniel Boone, man, I haven't heard that name in forever. So it was a good reminder, even for me, like going back to those roots of just understanding history and then also like how we got to where we are, right? Because I feel like in today's society, we don't just slow down to smell the roses as I feel like we used to in the past. The technology world is going so fast that we forget that we can just step out into nature. And I mean, just being a part of it and being able to uh be a I'm like a part I'm like thinking I'm just like it feels relaxing to me when I think about it all.
It was both relaxing and yet it was very intriguing. I think that's where a lot of the real honest journal entries and questions that I wrestled with for many pages in those journals really came from. because yeah, you can dive into a specific name and you can do this full character study of who they were and get to know them in the way that I took the time to get to know Boone. And then you look at how they kept going back, how they kept persevering. And that's one thing that I've noticed in a lot of people's mental health struggles. They struggle to find the terminology to understand why they keep persevering. I know for me, that was a big part of it because when I made the attempt and I woke up that next morning, I felt like the biggest failure in the world because at the time it felt terminal. It felt like having cancer. It's just bound to happen. And when it didn't work, I couldn't understand it. And then there's a certain little couple year gap in space in Daniel Boone's life that the more I thought about, the more I wrestled with exactly what those series of events were and how it led him to ultimately come through and mark the Boone Trace Trail. It clicked, it made sense. Because the part that I'm talking about was when he was, simply going out as a long hunter. And he would go out for months at a time to hunt, collect furs, and eventually he come through the Cumberland Gap and he was doing the same thing. But the band of Indians that were living in that area, they caught him. They took the furs, they kicked him out, sent him back across the gap. And then he came back. But this time he came back with his family and his close friends. And this is where the tragedy of that whole event happens because his son was killed in that attempt. And that then afterward they turned back, they went back to Virginia. And over the next 2 years, he wrestled with that. He returned to the site, grieved and everything. But then he got partnered up and he came back a third time with a group of men known as the Axemen. And they cut their trail all the way from down in the Virginia area up to Boonesboro. And that to me is like the biggest triumph just by the fact that you persevered, you come back, you evolve a little bit each time. But then again, when I really thought about it, I was like, what kind of man does that? What does it really take inside to continue to go back? Because nobody's going to look at him, point a finger, and say, you failed because you didn't try again. And that was where I found myself. I was like, I came back after that. There was a little bit of inspiration through a podcast. Then I struggled with it some more, got into talk therapy, opened up a journal, and then I went back again. And ultimately, time after time, I found my footing and I started marking my own way.
I love that. It is. It's all, I mean, persevere, the word I can't even, perseverance, and resilience, right? I always think of when babies fall down, they get right back up because that's what, to be able to walk, we have to learn how to walk. And so it's that resilience, and it's the resilience of changing your mindset though, because you're in such a place that you're like, it felt terminal to you, and there was one thing that really changed your thought process, which launched an entire movement really in what you do. And I think that's an important message to hear, is that it's not always right that doom and gloom or what you believe it might be. There may be a different side that you didn't know was there, like in the past, right? So I think it's just an amazing story, and we're going to talk more about it. We do have to go to our first quick sponsored break, but once we get back, I do want to talk about, like, as an EMT too, because I think that is fascinating also. So we'll be right back after this quick sponsored break.
1,917 people die daily from suicide globally.
I lost my middle sister, Carrie, to a completed suicide on February 20th, 2017.
How does Kelli, host of the Make Mental Health Matter show, impact lives? Number 1. Awareness.
My story, however, it isn't unique. I am a domestic violence survivor and a recovering addict. For 14 years, I was in active addiction. And because of Kelli and the work that she does and the opportunity to have my voice heard, I was able to stay clean and sober and have hit a year. I'm still here. And if it wasn't for Kelli answering my call the day that I thought I was going to take my life.
2. Conversation.
I'm curious, and I know that I've heard a lot in the BIPOC community. It is very hush hush. It's like one of those things that you don't talk about. Like you literally feel like it's not a conversation you can have. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
First, shout out to Kelli because I'm glad that she asked the question. I researched you before I went on your show and I saw how real and authentic you were. And I just appreciate the question because it is different and we have to have tough, courageous conversations. So yes, I always say I'm a triple diversity threat. I'm a Black woman with multiple disabilities. Now, I'm not really a threat, but to other people, I may be because people fear the unknown and what they're uncomfortable with.
Number 3. Education.
Kelli's passionate commitment to mental health awareness is a beautiful thing. It's clear in her social media posts, it's clear in the resources that she puts together, in the activities that she provides, her collaboration with organizations, and the consistent way that she continues to deliver a message, encouraging people to understand that they can share openly and to break the stigma around mental health. Kelli's topics cover children and adults, talk about things that we can do as a community, things that we can do individually, and her website is packed with information and resources and all kinds of contacts that you can use to reach out, whether you're dealing with something yourself or you're looking to help somebody else who is struggling. I encourage you to check it out.
And like that, we're back. If you happen to be just joining the Make Mental Health Matter show, thank you so much for watching or listening. My guest, Mike, and I are really talking about his lived experience through attempting to take his own life and then also moving into this place that he wanted to have more understanding about himself, his life, and, you know, shift into a completely different person, which it really started from hearing a podcast. I think words are so powerful, and being able to have resources, which I know we were kind of talking about the technology earlier, but that's one of the good parts is that you could tap into a podcast and then you started hearing quotes and you started thinking about other things in your life that you had experienced. And you also shared that because you are an EMT and you helped people like in some of their worst moments, right? And I guess for me, before you and I had talked prior, I understand that as an EMT, you also help people through crisis, right? It's not just the you cut yourself or, you know, the things I guess that we see on TV. We also have to think about those moments that people have crisis and or they have breakdown, right? A mental breakdown. And as an EMT, those are things that you're going to see. I've had one other guest who was also an EMT, and it's fascinating the stories, of course, that he has experienced. But thinking about you and when you were struggling with your mental health. So, were you an EMT during that time also?
So actually, no, I was not an EMT at that time. I was working in the commercial oil field, and I ended up making the transition not too long after everything fell apart. And to go all the way back to like going to school and doing the training part, I remember because it was a 6 month long process, and I remember going in, every day and My teacher, instructor, mentor, Lou, would tell all these crazy stories in order to make everything that he was teaching make sense. And every day I'd be like, I bet you it's going to take forever for me to accumulate just even a handful of interesting stories that, when I share, it's like, yeah, that really happened. And it really, lo and behold, once I got through school, passed the test, and got hired into the ambulance company, it took probably 4 hours before I had my first really crazy, interesting story. And they've been accumulating ever since.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, you're like, okay, here we are. We're doing this. All right. And are you still an EMT today?
Yes, I'm still licensed and I still practice as well. I spend 4 days a week on the ambulance.
That's awesome. And I'm curious, so because that space I feel like is because you're constantly going, right? And you're giving, 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 giving. So what or where's the question? There's a question there. I'm thinking about like your mental health and then being in that environment now. How are you really like taking care of yourself to make sure that, because as you said earlier, it's not just like uh you're you change everything, right? Like it's a process. It's a full process from where you were to where you are now, but you also have to be aware of your own mental health in those situations and knowing where you have in the past been. Like, so what are some things that you do personally for your mental health?
So, really, I mean, every step of the way throughout my journey, I feel has prepared me for it because I've already had those systems in place, with the journaling, the getting out, hiking, and different outdoor recreation skills, just that time and space to let things process. Whether it's a day long, spending a day off outside, or it's just 20 minutes at the end of the night journaling, just being able to give myself that simple little space and the grace to say, okay, this is what the day was, look at it, understand it a little bit, and then, you're ready to move on.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, like, I guess, or I would think as an EMT, you kind of have to compartmentalize a little bit and be a little disassociated just so that you're not taking that energy home with you.
Absolutely. You definitely got to have that boundary kind of set within your mind and within yourself of, okay, I'm willing to give all of this, but when the call is over, I'll stop for like 5, 10 minutes, take a deep breath, and maybe talk through it with my partner, or even if I just type something out on my phone, whatever, and just let things go. It's just a matter of working with your own natural rhythm and understanding that I'm a part of this person's, crisis or emergency. I'm playing the supportive role, giving you the space to experience what you're experiencing, but I'm helping you along the way. When you take in that frame of mind, it kind of gives you that space to, I guess, in a way, disassociate and unattach because you realize, hey, I'm leaving this here with you. This was your experience. I just got to be the supporting cast.
I love that. Yeah. I think for me it took me a little while, as I'm sure it did with you, to get to that place of like I don't have to absorb everybody's energy. I can let them have it. It's not mine to carry. And that I think has been really life-changing for me, especially as a coach and in the mental health space on a daily basis because I mean there is stories that you hear about or experiences or situations that you're a part of and it definitely could get to you if you allow it to, but I love that you also utilize nature and find what works for you and your phone. I love that because I do that myself too.
All of my work on the side as far as the project and writing, believe it or not, I actually do it on my phone. I emphasize the idea of putting it down and creating space, so it almost feels counterdictive. But there, I do put it down in order to pick up an actual journal and write this stuff out. And then I'll come back and I'll either record the audio, the video, or, write it out, whatever it ends up being. But you do have to have that balance, that boundary within yourself that says, okay, I'm going to set this side of time without any technology. And that's another really good aspect about nature for somebody that's kind of wrestling with the idea and they're looking for something to push them over the edge to actually put it into practice. Because a lot of the time you get out far enough, there's no cell service. So you got to put it down.
That is true. Yes. I'm like even in the city, there's spaces that I'm like, man, my technology. And then at that moment I'm like, do you really need it right now? Do you?
See, and I love that because I know a lot of people that wrestle with that. Will hit a dead zone. I'll be out with my, a couple of different partners that I have, and we'll hit a dead zone when we stop to stand by. And they're like, I can't use my phone. I'm like, it's okay, breathe. And I even find myself in a, here and there where I'm trying to record something. And I'm like, I don't have service. Oh, it's okay. Just breathe. You know, it is one of those tools that almost like back in the pioneer days, if your axe wasn't sharp, you had a problem.
Yeah. Well, and to think like, I mean, back in the day, we didn't even have the cell phones, right? Like you didn't even have access to any of that. You had to go find a payphone and use a quarter and hope that it works, right? Yeah.
Yep. And then if somebody needed you, they'd click your little beeper and your little pager would go off and it'd be all awkward. I remember them days.
Right. Yes. Yes. We have come very far.
Yes, we have.
So I wanted you to share a little bit about your podcast also. Tell the audience a little bit more about what your podcast is all about and what kinds of things you talk about.
Okay. So 5.5 years worth of open-ended philosophy and wilderness meditation is kind of led me to, writing the book. And then the book has led to this evolution in the podcast, where now instead of it being, oh, there's a tree, let me sit down and write a episode about what I think this tree's going through. Now I'm actually telling this full-on story about the frontier and really exploring this idea about, the frontier didn't disappear, it just moved inward. So how do we negotiate it? And I do that by, using different historical people as a mirror. Like right now, since I'm only a few episodes into this idea, the main focus is Daniel Boone, but then it'll venture out. It'll bring in people like Tecumseh and Chief Blackfish, different people that were out there, even his wife, Rebecca, and different people from the frontier. I'm not sure exactly how it's playing out. I'm kind of writing them one episode as I go, just like I've always done, but it's a lot of fun to play with. And, it's very interesting to me. And it seems to catch on, and a lot of people have caught a lot of interest and really enjoyed the storytelling.
That's awesome. And where do your episodes go out?
So the episodes land everywhere from Apple to Spotify to probably the most obscure podcast player that anybody could be carrying.
That's awesome. And I want to talk about your book also. We do have to go to our quick last sponsor break, but once we get back, we'll chat a little bit more about your book too. So we'll be right back after this quick break.
What if you could transform your mental health journey with just one question? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to prioritize your mental well-being like never before? Well, now's your chance. Introducing Make Mental Health Matter, the show that's changing the conversation about mental wellness. Join us every Monday on Dream Vision 7 Radio Network at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time as we delve into insightful discussions, expert advice, and inspiring stories. Hosted by Kelli Melissa Reinhardt, a warrior for mental health. This show is your guide to breaking down the stigma surrounding mental health and discovering valuable resources to enhance your well-being. So, are you ready to take charge of your mental health journey? Tune in and let's make mental health matter together.
And like that, we're back again. That's a short one. If you happen to be just tuning in to the Make Mental Health Matter show, you just missed the whole beginning. So make sure you go back. My guest, Mike, and I are really talking about his experience as an EMT, also as an author, and now as a podcaster. So, I want to also, I know we talked briefly about your book, and really it started with journaling, which was a task that a therapist gave you, and you're like, this is not going to work. Why am I doing this? And then you found that actually it does work. And it became, I guess, kind of like a superpower in a way, because then it transformed into wanting to write a book and exploring more of the life of Daniel Boone and the frontier, and knowing that you get like in nature, right? Doing meditation and experiencing nature on such a different level. So, share a little bit more about the book specifically. Like, what are readers going to get out of it when they read it?
So I think when you read it, the biggest thing that'll come out of it is you'll change the terminology around the questions that you ask yourself about life. And that's what I've noticed the biggest theme throughout all 30 of the journals that I used to compile the book from is what started out as just, angry scribbling started to refine itself. And before you knew it, there was a very coherent paragraph, and then page after page after page, it grew. And I think that that's the biggest thing that anybody can get out of the book. If you're a history lover, you'll enjoy the historical aspects and the way that I got to experience them. But for me, the biggest thing is if you're into memoirs and you're into self growth, that's right there in the same pages too.
And you actually, I mean, you went and traveled to all these different places just to like fully understand, which I think is so cool.
Originally, I started doing that just to like better understand and experience Daniel Boone. I thought that's what I was chasing. And then it changed. Then it became I was traveling to understand myself by going to these places and seeing a reflection in a mirror, per se. And then it got kind of strange. By the time I got to Fort Boonesboro, the very first time that I sat down at the original site and I meditated, and it's a story that I'm still kind of uncomfortable sharing because I'm very skeptical about, I guess the other side, ghost encounters or whatever. But I was sitting there completely alone. There was nobody else in the ruins, let alone in the field. And I felt somebody tap me on my shoulder. And then I heard, Boone's not here. And, obviously the knowledge that I had at the time about Daniel Boone, Kentucky would be the last place that anybody would go look for him if they were. In fact, I wasn't even looking for him by that point. I was just going to experience these places because I thought they were cool and fun and helpful for me. Plus, it gave me a reason to fill the journal. And the more I thought about it after that, I was like, I have to go from here to Defiance, Missouri, where his gravesite sits. And I went and I sat and meditated there. And again, I had that kind of weird experience where it was like as if somebody was sitting across from me smiling. Somebody finally understands what I was talking about. Because I've always opened my podcast with a Daniel Boone quote where I'm never truly lost. Sure, I was turning around in the woods for 3 days, but I was never truly lost. And after I did that morning, I went to the historical site of his son Nathan's house where he passed away at. That quote was everywhere. So it kind of made me think. I was like, you know what? I need to really figure out what's going on here and why this keeps happening. And he became more of a subject matter on the podcast. And then I put it down for a while and took a break. And kept having more and more reoccurring thoughts and journal entries and conversations that he'd come up in. And I was like, all right, book's gotta be done now. And I thought that was the end of it. So I thought, I'd write the book, go through the process, see what happens with it. And then I went down to Xpenia, Ohio, and I walk into the James Galloway cabin that they have in town that they moved there and restored after a tornado. And this, older lady that was taking care of the place for the day, she goes, what brought you here? What is it that you really want to see? So I was like, I just finished this book about Daniel Boone. And granted, at that day, I was kind of out being, me being a little bit retarded with the book and going out taking pictures with it everywhere, just being silly. And I was like, so I finished writing this book about Daniel Boone. And this was a cool place to come take pictures with it. And then she goes, I'm a distant relative of Daniel Boone. And we sat and talked for about 2 or 3 hours. I gave her a copy of the book and, I didn't really expect anything to come out of that. But the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe there's more. And then I've had this recent connection with Dr. John Fox, who is the head of the Boone Trace Friends group. And all of a sudden that's popped up. So there's going to be another book coming down the line after this one.
That's so cool. I mean, so when you were sharing, it gave me chills when you said somebody tapped you on the shoulder. So, yeah, no, I am one of those people that I was also skeptical, and I was like, what are you talking about, right? But I've had experiences also, and that kind of opened up. I was like, well, shoot, if somebody's trying to get connected, right, might as well. And it was more really like with my sister, I think I was just like, so no, 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 don't even like, I don't, I don't want to experience any of that. And then, it kept like, people would say things. And then I ended up, a medium at one point approached me and I was like, don't you dare. And then it was, I mean, all about my sister. And I was like, oh my gosh. So from that moment, I was like, okay, fine, fine. I'm I'm here. I'll listen. It's fine. So yeah, it's definitely, I mean, fascinating when you think about those and I love so meditation, right? It's calming of the mind to allow whatever is happening, right? And I think it doesn't always have to be just in meditation that you have these experiences, but I think it opens up the space of our higher spirit, is what I call it, to be able to tap in a way. So no, I don't. I think it's cool that you had that experience.
It was definitely a unique experience. And it's something that I talk about in the book. And it leads into probably one of the most fascinating parts that I really enjoyed writing was this little study about because at Fort Boonesboro, Daniel Boone was actually taken captive by Chief Blackfish and his tribe of Indians. And in the course of that process, he was adopted. So he spent months living in this group that didn't trust him. They followed what Blackfish has said, and hey, he's a part of us, whatever. But they didn't never fully trusted him. And ultimately, he left and he escaped because he found out that the siege of Fort Boonesboro was pending and about to happen. So he still had those emotional ties to where he came from because of his family and friends, and he wanted to go let them know, and he wanted to try to save as many lives as he could. And ultimately, throughout the siege, obviously there was a little bit of scrimmaging back and forth, and a few people did end up losing their lives. But he ended up negotiating back and forth on both sides to bring the most peaceful ending that he could. But the ironic catch to that was the fact that the people inside the fort didn't fully trust him either. They thought he had been too quote unquote Indianized because of the time that he spent there. And where I was really fascinated with that, because I walked through that for a long time in my recovery journey, was you're holding on to the past, trying to navigate your steps in a way that honors and brings attention from the past, but yet you're trying to navigate the future as well. And you're trying to invite that stuff in. So how does that work? And the mirror reflection that I got out of that was simply living true to your values, because he was a very pacifistic person and he lived to that. He held the value of friends and family. He gained friends and family from the Shawnee, and he held the value for both. And he just stayed in the middle, and eventually it all worked out in his favor. In fact, after it was all over in the fort, they brought him in and they tried him for treason. And he not only won that, but then he got a promotion out of that. So it was very interesting to me.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, I like, I'm just fascinated by. I mean, because you don't. Well, I guess we do sometimes talk about the history and really fully understanding, right? But you took this opportunity to really fully dive in to understand him, which translates into like your life, right? Which I think is so cool how you've made those connections and then being able to share through your book, which I don't believe that Daniel Boone is a part of history classes anymore. I don't know. I mean, it's been a really long time since I've been in high school, but I don't know if we have any of those. Oh no, we lost connection. That's okay. He'll come back. When we're live, sometimes those things happen and that's okay. But um, I just think that it's really cool how he has taken all of this information and translated it into a book and now into a podcast. And ultimately, we are bringing history back. Some of you may not fully understand the story of Daniel Boone, and you may not fully understand like the frontier and how the land was discovered. And really, the land was Indian land, right? And I don't think that that is a part of history anymore, unfortunately. So the hope is that if you have a chance to read his book, you'll get a little bit more history behind what that all looks like. I'm gonna drop because I know he hasn't come back in yet, and that's totally okay. These things happen, but I do have a link for all his information. So it's the project mindfullyoutdoors.com. So those of you that are listening, it's project project mind mind fully fully outdoors. So OORS.com. So project mindfully outdoors.com. You can see all of his information. All right, he's back. Let me bring him back on. But you can go check that out and I'll bring you. Okay, you're back. You're back.
I am so sorry about that. My phone fried out.
Oh no, it's like I don't want to be outdoors. Yeah. No, you're good. Was just sharing a little. I shared your website, so the project mindfullyoutdoors.com, if anybody wanted to go there. And I'm assuming that your book is on there, your podcast is on there, and just more information about your story. Is that correct?
That's everything. Yep.
Cool. No, and I was like kind of saying right before that I don't believe that like Daniel Boone is even in the history classes anymore. So I think that you bringing back this information of like where the roots came from, right? Because not a lot of people talk about the land being the Indians and how, we had to discover all the land. So I think it's cool that you're tapping back into that and bringing it out in your book too.
So actually, it's a very interesting point you bring up because the legend of Daniel Boone was like the first quote unquote famous person by our definition today. He came across the gap as we talked about. And by the time that the trace was marked, they had started writing dime store novels about him, blown his name up, and he was very well known throughout his ventures in Kentucky. By the time he got to Missouri and being an older man, that fame and that recognition had started to fade away already. So there was actually only one true painting that was done of Daniel Boone, and that was done by Chester Harrington toward the end of his life. And when Chester got down around Defiance, Missouri, and was looking for him, he would ask people as he passed or go door to door and knock on the door and say, "Hey, do you know where I can find Colonel Daniel Boone?" And most people didn't know. Even though he lived right there, most people didn't even know who he was. And, to me, it was the idea of how we get this life that we build or people give us, and then it gets taken away. So we become kind of obscure. And how do we go about handling that and processing it? For him, he just eased into it. By this point, he was kind of stricken with arthritis and having a very difficult time moving around, but he still wanted to hunt. And he was almost blind too by the end of his life. And he would try to go out until he couldn't do it no more. And by the time he couldn't do it anymore, and by the final days of his life, he had just enjoyed where life put him. All the adventures were behind him, and he was now a grandfather. And he was now kind of, this older man just reflecting on life, sharing stories. And yeah, throughout time, that's been diminished because we celebrate the victories. We celebrate all the adventures and successes and heroic kind of moments. And we overlook the parts that make anybody a human being because they get uncomfortable. We have to ask the difficult questions. And a lot of those difficult questions from that era kind of reflect some of the more difficult and darker times of our country as far as policies go. And it's easy to sweep that under the rug because we don't want to acknowledge it. But when you go back and you look at it and you acknowledge it, that's where you get the opportunity to learn and make better decisions going forward and make that frontier more more inhabitable, more comfortable for the quality of life and the quality of person you want to be.
I love that. I was like, mic drop. But it's because really, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody, but I feel like oftentimes in society today, we take for granted everything that that has happened up to this point. And I think that when we start to reflect about history and we start to really educate ourselves, right? And then we translate that into our own story and how we want to show up in the world. I think it just like genuinely changes how we are as humans. And I think that that also goes back to mental health, as we were talking about, right? It changes how we look at everything in life, which I believe is like where your story really lives, right? And that you have been able to make these, instead of listening to somebody tell you how bad of a person you are, you shifted into the person that you truly were meant to be. And now you're sharing your experience and your story, and not taking for granted what you have been given. And I think that's just an incredible journey to be able to share with everyone. And I know we're coming to the very end of this, but I would love for you, other than I know I just dropped it, which is projectmindfullyoutdoors.com, but any final words that you want to share with the audience?
So I think the final words that I would share actually kind of stem most fittingly from Daniel Boone. I was never truly lost in the woods. I got turned around and bewildered for 3 days, but I found my way back. And then I want to build on that because this whole book and idea and project was about finding my way back home. And it raised the question, does home have to look the same? Can the traveler really travel the path without being changed? And the answer to both of those questions is no, because we progress. And in order to progress, you have to live life, which simply asks one question of you, to be a participant. You know, one step forward, whether it's a large step or a small step, even on your weakest day, is really a prayer filled with hope. And hope is what guides life.
I love that. And that was another mic drop moment. Thank you so much for being an amazing guest, sharing your story here. I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me, especially with my phone cooking out at the end there.
You're good. You're good. All right, y'all. That was another amazing episode of the Make Mental Health Matters show. We are at the very end, but I hope that you take a moment to go check out Mike's website. Again, it is projectmindfullyoutdoors.com. Learn, get some education around Daniel Boone, but also, as he just said so gracefully, is coming back to yourself and learning more about yourself and what that looks like and how you can show up in this thing that we call life. So no matter what you do, make sure you come back and show up for my show next week. I go live every single Monday at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. on Dream Vision 7 Radio, or you can watch on E360 TV at 5 p.m. All of that is Mountain Denver time. So I will see you next week. Bye, y'all.
Thank you for joining today for the Make Mental Health Matter show. We hope you found today's episode insightful and empowering. Remember, your mental health journey doesn't end here. For more resources, support, and information, visit us online at makementalhealthmatter.org. You won't forget to subscribe to our show or follow us on social media to stay connected and continue the conversation, will you? That's right. Together, let's make mental health matter. Until next time, take care of yourselves and